Good morning. Please rise for our gathering hymn, When We Are Gathered.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon. It's so great to have all of you here today, and a special greeting to any newcomers that might be among us. We're glad you're here, and wonderful to have so many folks joining us online as well. First Unitarian is a multi-generational community where individuals of any age can learn and grow spiritually, and then together we strive toward building a beloved community. First of all, I'd like to make a couple of announcements this morning. One is to welcome our guest conductor, Sterling Roberts. Thank you. Sterling comes to us having finished his 6th year of public school music teaching in Gervais, Oregon, and his 4th year singing in the Willamette Master Chorus in Salem, a group that sang just last week up in British Columbia. He's currently finishing up his duties as the music director at the Unitarian, at the United Church of Christ in Vancouver, Washington, and he's preparing to transition this fall for an opportunity in Bend. Some of you may remember Sterling's time here at First Unitarian some years ago when he directed our women's choir. So it's great to have you with us today, Sterling. Thank you. And thank you to our pickup choir, folks who got up early this morning to come in and make music to share with us in the service, so thank you for that. A little later in our service, following the Story for All Ages, we offer community-building games and activities for children ages 4 and older in our Buchanan building just next door. The congregation will sing the kiddos out at that time, and we hope they'll all join in the fun next door. After the service, everyone is invited to our social hour, which is just downstairs in Fuller Hall, but there's also a special invitation today. This is the day of the annual Portland Pride Parade, and folks from our congregation will be marching along with fellow Unitarian Universalists from the Portland area. Our contingent will meet right in front of Elliott Chapel immediately after the service, so do not tarry. Then we'll gather with others in the North Park blocks at the corner of Northwest 9th and Cooch. And everyone is invited to join in the fun and to bear witness at this important event. And do remember your water bottles. And now let's take a moment to greet one another. You can use the chat option if you're online, and if you're in person, let's say hello now. Reverend Tom will light our chalice this morning. If you're joining us from home, please do light a candle or chalice if you have one handy. We are Unitarian Universalists. We light this chalice in faith, in hope, and in love.
Our call to worship this morning comes from poet Rudy Francisco. Yes. And sometimes it all arrives at once. The anxiety, the fear, the voices that scratch your confidence like a chalkboard. And somehow all the oxygen in the room suddenly becomes water, and you begin to wonder if you have what it takes to grow gills. You wonder if you can blend in with the fish. You wonder if you will ever breathe again. And the answer is, not every building that shakes will collapse. The answer is, not everything that chips will crumble. The answer is, this is temporary, and yes, you will. As we gather on this Sabbath day, may we find our own way, each of us and all of us, to yes. May we find our way to hope and to blessing. May we find ourselves together here in a community we might know as beloved. It's good to be here together. Let's join in singing now, How Could Anyone? Please rise in body and in spirit.
Anyone ever tell you
Please remain standing for our responsive reading entitled Love by Mark Bellatini. Love, you are strong as a dark blue mountain. Love, you are as fluid as a wide silver river. Love, you are as splendid as a clear night sky. Love, you are as mysterious as a dark forest. Love, you are as wise as enduring friendship. Love, you are true power, not mere distraction, truth, not deceit, purpose, not impulse, poetry, not prose, sing, not sang, now more than tomorrow, but tomorrow more than yesterday. Love, condense yourself into this moment, permeate the silence that joins us in community, so that in the fire of the words to come, the promises of this hour might be sealed in peace. Amen. Let's sing together now our doxology, Spirit of Life.
Good morning. I'm Morgan, and our story for all ages today is written by Joanna McClintock and is illustrated by Juana Mendina, and it is entitled, "'Twas the Night Before Pride." 'Twas the night before Pride on a warm evening in June. All the people got ready with the rise of the moon. The drag queens all brushed their wigs with great care, and the bikers checked their tires to make sure they had air. Across the city, people's outfits were planned, and the instruments were polished for the queer marching band. Mom told us all we should go to bed early. She's that kind of mom who's more boyish than girly. While Mama finished packing our snacks in a bag, Sammy started chewing on the edge of our flag. As I finished my sign, which I laid on the floor, I remembered the prides I'd been to before. All day we will walk in the streets up and down. Pride's one of the best celebrations around. There were our floats and loud music and rainbows and glitter. Last year, we ran into our babysitter. Tomorrow will be baby Sammy's first Pride. Can we tell the whole story? I hopefully cried. So we sat on the couch, a mom on each side, and took turns telling the tale of the very first Pride. A long time ago, in 1969, there wasn't a Pride March. It was a less fair time. Queer people all over, of each shape and size, didn't have any rights recognized. So much of their lives they had to keep hidden. Even their clothing was sometimes forbidden. Stonewall was a place where it was safe to be proud, but police would storm in to say this wasn't allowed. So one hot night in June, people stopped being quiet. They decided to fight, and they started a riot. More and more gathered to fight back in the heat. Some started a kick line in the middle of the street. Police broke up the crowd night after night, but the people stood strong, knowing this wasn't right. And so it began, a march that spread worldwide to show everyone it's good to have pride. It happens sometimes we're not given respect. It can take a long time for some to accept. That's why every year we all get together and march in the streets no matter the weather. To know that we matter, to show all we exist, and that any oppression we must always resist. So Pride's not just about tutus and rainbow suspenders. It's about rights for queers and all our beautiful genders. Pride's a day that is crowded. It's a day that is long. It's a day that means together we're strong. As I closed my eyes, I thought of Pride's past. Pride to me means to me, being yourself is a blast. So tomorrow I will march with my family and cheer. Happy Pride to all. It's great my family is here. And now I'd like to invite our children and youth aged 4 and older to join in community building games and activities next door in Buchanan Building. Children and youth are also welcome to stay in the service, and let's sing them out with a hymn of blessing, Make the Channels for the Streams of Love.
This week we're sharing our offering plate with TRUST, which stands for Transgender, Religious, Professional, Unitarian Universalists Together. TRUST is an organization of trans UUs who are living out a call to ministry within our faith. Its mission is to advocate for the gifts, safety, liberation, and leadership of trans religious professionals in Unitarian Universalist ministries and institutions. If you'd like to give to our offering electronically, whether you're here in person or online, the next slide will show you how to do that, including a web link. And if you're here in person and would like to donate by check or cash, our ushers will be coming by with baskets. Thank you so much for your generosity. Each week we make space in our service to name the concerns of our community life. Pastoral support is always available here through our ministers and through our lay ministers. Their care includes holding the prayers of the congregation throughout each week. If you're here in person, you can light a candle in either one of our side galleries and write down your prayer intention. And online, you can email an intention to prayer@firstunitarianportland.org. If you have a concern that you would like mentioned here in a service and also in our weekly e-news, you can email that to parishconcerns@firstunitarianportland.org. We all bring joys and concerns held in our hearts each week, and there are a couple of concerns to specifically mention today. Member Carolyn Buell took a bad fall on Wednesday and is recovering in the trauma and acute intensive care unit of Emmanuel Hospital. She broke her arm, has a facial injury, and suffered a concussion. Thankfully, she is already showing signs of improvement. Cards and well wishes are most welcome, and our healing thoughts go out to her. Right now, it would be good to contact Carolyn's daughter, Dana Buell, here on staff before any planning of an in-person visit. We also hold member Ethan Scarl this morning. Following a surgery he had on May 30th, Ethan is currently in hospital at home with a parade of medical personnel and hospital equipment in his living room to treat an infection. We send him our good wishes for continued healing. Will you pray with me now? Sweet Spirit, God of many names or no God at all, it's Sunday again. We're sitting in church and we're called upon to pray, but for what? We'd be here all day and then some if we prayed for all the people, all the institutions, all the situations that could use some heavenly intervention. What are the words that can hold it all? Certainly, our loving thoughts go to Carolyn and Ethan. Our hearts are filled with gratitude on this special day of Portland Pride. And let's not neglect prayers for ourselves. There are days when we could certainly use some. But I think the Buddhists were onto something with their metta meditation, sending loving kindness inward and outward, a boundless love for all beings everywhere. Let's make that happen, at least in this moment, right here, together. Let's do it now. Imagine your heart opening like a beautiful rose, sending love, limitless love, deep compassion out into the world. Imagine. Try it now, really. Will that change the world? Don't know. But it might change us, and that couldn't hurt. Amen. Let's share a few moments of quiet reflection together. Our reading this morning is by Audre Lorde, entitled A Litany for Survival. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward at once, before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures like bread in our children's mouths, so that their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hope to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. But when our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So, it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive.
Thank you, choir. Thank you, Sterling. I will never forget the first Pride Parade that I attended, now more than 30 years ago. It was in San Francisco, and I was just a few years out of the closet myself as a gay man. This was the first time I had lived in a place that had a Pride Parade, and well, if you're going to start somewhere, you might as well start in San Francisco. And let's just say that it was definitely one of those I'm not in Wisconsin anymore moments in my life. There was the usual beginning of the parade led by the lesbian motorcycle contingent. There were floats and bands and groups of employees from companies of all stripes marching. There were the parents and friends of lesbians and gays. There were people in all kinds of dress and undress. There were the drag queens. There was just an amazing diversity of people. And part of that diversity that I remember most all these years later were the families along that parade route, the just ordinary folks wanting their kids to have this experience of diversity, to celebrate the community that they were a part of. Somehow that was part of the experience that I had not anticipated back then. The presence of those ordinary folks sent an important message to someone who, like me, who wasn't sure that they had a place in the community. Their presence said, yes, you do have a place. Yes, you are welcome. Their presence presented a vision of the world where all were somehow welcome at the table in this place. And yes, I cried my share of tears that day, mostly tears of joy, because I felt so very welcomed. When I moved here to Portland, the parades were smaller and maybe then all the more important. Through the years, those who have made it their job to stand at the side and yell hateful things to those as we march by. But through the years, those folks have seemed to become less and less of a presence. Mostly the parade is about joy and about celebration. And through the years, a kind of routine has developed. A pride parade seemed to become more and more routine. And through those years living in this bubble we call Portland, I actually remember thinking if the time would come when pride parades maybe were no longer needed. I remember when in my lifetime that might happen. And now I look back and realize just how naive those thoughts were. No, the sad reality is that we're a long, long ways from that day. Like all struggles for justice, it can take a long time, and there's always, always more work to be done. Looking back through these years, I've come to know how hard change is to come by. I see how progress is all too often followed by one backlash or another. How with change can come those who feel like something's been taken away from them. How one group's progress can be seen as a threat to some other groups, and particularly when those others don't even know they have certain privileges. All of that can feel like something indeed may be taken away. How progress and history can often feel not so much linear as something more circular. How we can't take anything at all for granted. And how pride is something we all need to flourish. I think of the years of struggle for marriage equality. I think of the marriage rights granted and then annulled and then taken away again and then given. I think of how gay marriage for years could be used as such a potent wedge in our national and even in our local politics. And I do take hope that marriage equality has now moved to some place of acceptance that I don't think I could have ever imagined. And yet sometimes it seems as if things still haven't changed much at all. Right now, it seems to be our transgender siblings, and especially transgender children, who are the targets. Over 20 states in the last year have passed laws restricting or banning care for transgender young people. There's something about these current laws that particularly hits home, that's particularly insidious. Now, coming of age is hardly ever an easy process. I don't care who you are, but let alone when you're trying to live into, to understand some part of yourself that maybe isn't in some majority, how what you need is love and care, not hate and harassment. And I'm struck by just how easy it seems to be for officials, public officials, to jump on the bandwagon. And there are some exceptions. In Louisiana, State Senator Fred Mills, chairman of the Health and Welfare Committee, voted against a bill banning gender-affirming health care, first casting the vote that killed it in committee, and then once it was revived and rerouted through a friendlier committee, voted against it on the Senate floor. Now, Mills is no LGBTQ hero or ally. He voted for two other noxious bills, one limiting what schools can teach, a Don't Say Gay bill in Louisiana, and another giving teachers the right to ignore a student's chosen pronouns, or as one writer put it, let's call that a Don't Say They bill. But the health care bill gave him particular pause. Mills is a pharmacist and explained his committee vote by saying, "Always in my heart of hearts, I believe that a decision should be made by a patient and a physician. I believe in the physicians of Louisiana. I believe in the scope of practice. I believe in the standard of care." When he voted against the bill the second time, he referred to the fact that it would end ongoing care for a few dozen children receiving it. His words, "What's really troubling about this bill is basically it says that if you're presently stabilized on this treatment, that you have to be weaned off. Have you ever seen legislation where we've taken people off medication that's FDA approved?" In Utah, Republican State Senator Daniel Thatcher is a more consistent vote against anti-trans bills ever since his work on hate crime legislation and suicide prevention led him to do two things that should be routine but aren't: consider the data and meet actual people affected by anti-trans legislation. Thatcher voted against a bill banning trans students from playing girls' sports last year, but the bill passed easily through the state's legislature. But then another Republican, Governor Spencer Cox, vetoed it, writing, "Rarely has so much fear and anger been directed at so few. I don't understand what they are going through or why they feel the way they do, but I want them to live. I want them to live." In Thatcher's view, prohibiting gender-affirming health care against medical data is for purely political reasons. In his words, is anti-conservative and anti-Christian. His words, "I have had people who claim to be Christian reach out to me and tell me that I can't be Christian unless I hate certain people." He said in a podcast, "Well, I don't know who your Christ is, but he kind of sucks. There's not a single person who's going to die if we don't pass this bill, but there are people who are going to die if we do." Of course, this is just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. There are the Don't Say Gay bills in Florida and Texas and so many other places. There have even been bills wanting to ban drag shows around the country. I should note that the theme of this year's parade here in Portland is not a single person, but the idea of drag. And did you hear the news that the new Miss Netherlands is an openly trans person? There are moments to celebrate, but it is not at all an easy time. And of course, this isn't just happening in other places. You may have heard that here in Portland, what's going on in the Roman Catholic Archdiocese. In January, the Archbishop of Portland quietly changed a policy in Catholic schools that recognized students by their chosen pronouns. This was a well-established practice even in Catholic schools. But then in January, that policy was quietly changed, and children were told that they had to use the pronouns that corresponded to their gender assigned at birth. But as news of that policy has spread, there have been more and more protests by students and by teachers. I'm told that a number of principals have actually resigned in protest, and 2 leaders of the Archdiocesan Department of Education were fired when they tried to stand with parents and students. It's left a lot of parents asking how they can find a safe space for their children to simply go to school and to be educated. It feels as if the bullies are in charge in all too many places in our lives. Part of how bullies thrive is that they figure out who's the most vulnerable, and then they go after those people. And when the bullies are in positions of power, it makes it all the more pernicious. It's one thing when it's an individual bully. It's another thing when bullies have institutional power behind them. Now, the deal with bullies, at least I've learned in my life, is that they're very good at figuring out just who that most vulnerable person or group is. They're good at figuring out who will stand up to them and who will stand by and let that bullying happen. That's where courage comes in. That's where visibility comes in. That's where pride comes in. As Unitarian Universalists, part of our call is to ask, who is it that's in our circle of care? Who is it that we're asked to look out for? Who is it that's looking out for us, to recognize and to pay attention, to see in our lives the lives of others? And I know this is much easier said than done. All too often, it is the most vulnerable who can be left behind. Now, Pride celebrations are held at this time of year, as in the story that Morgan shared, to mark the Stonewall riots back in New York in 1969 that are considered the beginning of the gay rights movement. Part of that story that doesn't always get told, however, is that the people who led the riot, those who were beaten up the most badly, those who were the heroes, they were the drag queens who had been the subjects of the worst harassment. They were the ones who said no and the ones who fought back. And most of them were people of color. They were more often than not the ones who had been singled out for the worst punishment, the worst discrimination. And while gay and lesbian folks have made tremendous strides in these 50+ years, it hasn't always been so for our trans siblings. Their sacrifice has not necessarily been acknowledged as much as it should be, and they in particular have been the subject of so much discrimination. And trans women, particularly trans women of color, die disproportionately in disproportionate numbers by violence and by suicide. All too often, it is those who are the most vulnerable who get left out. They're the ones who do get bullied. That may be part of what makes change that brings everyone along with it, so very hard to do. The beauty of creation comes in the diversity of all of life. That includes all humans and all of our diversity and in all of our uniqueness. A theology that recognizes how we are each precious and how we are each worthy, how we are each loved for being just who we are, including our struggles and including our gifts. How it is we all survive, maybe even thrive together. Pride is a time to celebrate and to bless. It's a time to recognize how we are all so very precious, how we are all so worthy. And all of that takes work and commitment and persistence. And our task, maybe our challenge, is to see ourselves in all of that. And sometimes the part about seeing our own selves and our own worth and our own preciousness, That can be the most difficult part of all. We need to do that before we're able to see others as precious too. And from there, the task, I think, is to make space for others, for us to see others there too. That's where that solidarity part comes in. Today in the parade, I'll be thinking of those who have gone before, their courage, their humanness. I'll be thinking of this congregation and its witness through all these years. And I'll be remembering that part about how we are all works in progress and how this work is never, ever complete. How it will be important to keep having parades and marches and protests. How it will be important to keep saying yes and sometimes no. How it will be important to just keep on praying. How the importance of pride in all of its dimensions continues to be our call. On this day and in all of our days, may we know ourselves and may we know others. May we know all of creation to be beloved. Amen for us this day. Let's sing together as we close our service now. Let's sing This Little Light of Mine. Will you join me in singing? As we go forth, may we let our lights shine. This is the day we've been given. Let us rejoice in it and be glad in our marching, in our loving, in our bridge building. Go in peace. Practice love. Amen.
you.